Hi, it's Clyde again. I'm glad you're here, settling in, maybe getting comfortable under a blanket or letting your eyes get a little heavier. Before we get started, make sure to tap like and subscribe right now. Otherwise, you might drift off before you remember. And that would be unfortunate for both of us. And if you'd like to help support these very boring adventures, you can become a channel member. Members can even request a personalized sleepy story from me, which is still surprising to say out loud, but I love doing them. If you ever want to hear more of these slow, wandering tales, you can always visit the playlist with all my other boring travels. Places like the clock shop with the 700 ticking clocks, or the monastery where a monk walked by with a cabbage for no reason at all. But tonight I found myself in a place where the wind has very strong opinions. Monticello, Thomas Jefferson's estate, and apparently, where raking leaves. I arrived on one of those late autumn afternoons where the sun looks like it's tired too, sinking gently behind the Blue Ridge Mountains and making everything a warm, sleepy gold, the kind of light that makes you want to sigh for no real reason. I was standing on the lawn in front of Monticello, Jefferson's famous home, with its red brick and white columns and the dome that looks like it can't quite decide whether it wants to be a hat or a roof. You'd think it would be quiet up there, but the wind kept rushing by in soft, dramatic gusts, like it wanted to be part of the story. Someone had left a rake leaning against a tree trunk. It was tall and wooden, a little crooked, and looked like it had lived a very long, hard-working life. The kind of rake that would tell you stories if it had a mouth. Probably about blisters and calluses and leaves that never stayed put where they were supposed to. I picked it up and tried to stand confidently, but the wind pushed a whole new wave of dry leaves across the lawn at that same moment. They piled up in a little whirl around my ankles, like they were greeting me or mocking me. Hard to tell with leaves sometimes. A young man in 18th century clothing, a waistcoat, linen shirt, and slightly worried expression, hurried across the lawn toward me. He carried a teapot, a whole teapot. Just out in the open, like that was something people casually walked around with in 1807. "Mr. Jefferson says the wind's picking up," he told me, slightly out of breath. "So he thought you might like some tea before attempting the rake again." "The rake? Again?" I asked, although I already suspected something humiliating had occurred before my arrival. The young man nodded solemnly. "It threw someone earlier." I looked down at the rake in my hands. It didn't look dangerous. But then again, neither do goats, and I once met one that ate half a map of ancient Gaul right in front of me. The young man poured me a cup of tea from the teapot, which seemed to be apple and herb if my nose was identifying things correctly, and he handed it to me in a very delicate porcelain cup. A cup so fancy that I'm sure Thomas Jefferson used it to impress people. I tried to sip it bravely. The wind snatched a few leaves and stuck them to the side of the cup. "That'll happen," the young man said sympathetically, brushing them off with the back of his hand. "It's the season." I nodded, because that seemed like the sort of thing one should nod about while standing at Monticello holding a rake. Behind us, I heard someone calling out to release the chickens from a nearby pen. Apparently, Jefferson liked having them roam the grounds because he believed chickens led to moral improvement, which is something I still don't fully understand, but I respect that confidence. A particularly strong gust of wind pushed a mountain of leaves into a neat, yet entirely accidental, pile in front of me. "Well," the young man said, "that's convenient." I raised the rake, trying to look as heroic as someone can look while holding a rake. And that's where this whole adventure really begins. I took a slow breath, partly to steady myself, partly because the apple herb tea was still warming my hands, and partly because the rake felt heavier now that the young man had mentioned it had thrown someone earlier. Leaves rustled across the lawn again, swirling in a long ribbon that stretched from the edge of the orchard all the way to the steps of Monticello, like nature had decided to show off. The breeze made a soft, low hush as it drifted by, the kind of sound that makes you feel like the world is trying to say something very important. But it's far too drowsy to finish the sentence. The young man, his name, he eventually told me, was Peter, stood nearby with the teapot tucked carefully under one arm, just holding it, like it was a small pet, a very fragile porcelain pet that must be protected at all costs. Mr. Jefferson prefers his teapots transported with care, he said, in a tone that suggested he had once transported one without care and regretted it deeply. I nodded and leaned the rake down into the leaves. It made a pleasant sort of whish sound, like brushing the side of a very crunchy sleeping bag. The wind immediately undid the line I created. Like, instantly, a whole new scatter of leaves swept in and covered the exact spot I'd just raked, and then some. I blinked down at it. Peter sighed like a man who had personally experienced this tragedy many times. That happens, he said again. The wind has strong feelings. Does it always do that? I asked. Oh yes, he replied. Every autumn. Mr. Jefferson says it's because the estate sits at the top of the hill and the drafts swirl round like they're trying to imitate fashionably dramatic European salons. That didn't make sense, but I liked the confidence with which he said it. I tried again with the rake. Another whish, another swirl of leaves, another immediate undoing. Behind us, a small group of chickens began parading across the yard in a surprisingly orderly line, which is not something I expected chickens to do. One of them strutted like it was the leader. Another was carrying a piece of string in its beak for reasons known only to chickens. Peter followed my gaze. Mr. Jefferson is convinced observing chickens teaches a man something important about the human condition. What exactly? We're still working on that part, he admitted. As I angled the rake again, something else caught my attention. A gardener walking briskly across the side path with a wheelbarrow full of very mismatched things. A pumpkin, a stack of folded shirts, 3 onions, a book, a small wooden bucket, and unless I was losing my mind, a wooden flute sticking out from the pile. Is that all related? I asked. To what? Peter replied, watching the gardener with mild confusion. To each other. Oh no, he said. It rarely is. The wind picked up again, swirling dramatically around my feet. You'd think a gust like that would be loud, but it was more like someone brushing their fingers along the edge of a curtain. Soft, persistent, slightly judgmental. It's like the wind doesn't want these leaves raked, I murmured. Peter nodded. Last year it ripped a rake out of a man's hands, sent it halfway across the vegetable patch. That sounds dangerous. Oh, it missed the squash entirely. Very lucky. I stood there watching the leaves pile, scatter, repile, and reshuffle themselves as if auditioning for some sort of leafy ballet performance. The chickens paused to observe, one tilting its head at a dramatic angle like a critic contemplating an avant-garde production. Peter poured himself a bit of tea, still holding the teapot like a treasured heirloom. Well, he said, Mr. Jefferson appreciates the effort. He says raking is good for the spirit, even when the result is unnecessary. I wasn't sure if that was inspirational or absolutely useless. Maybe it was both. Just then, a dog, a small, brown, extremely determined dog, ran across the lawn carrying a stick 3 times its size, dragging it like it had somewhere extremely important to be. It didn't stop. It didn't hesitate. It just kept dragging that stick into the orchard, vanishing behind a tree with a sense of purpose I could only admire. Peter watched it go. That one belongs to the plantation blacksmith. It keeps stealing things. Yesterday it took a hammer. A hammer. Halfway down the mountain before they caught it. The wind blew a new wave of leaves directly at my face. I sputtered gently. Peter sipped his tea calmly, as though this were completely normal. "Shall we keep trying?" he asked, adjusting the teapot's angle like he was preparing for turbulence. I gripped the rake and nodded, even if the wind had other things in mind. I was mid-rake, or mid-attempt to rake, when a particularly ambitious gust of wind swept down the mountainside like it had something to prove. It didn't just scatter the leaves this time. Oh no. It lifted half the pile clean off the ground and sent them swirling upward in a dramatic spiral that looked a little too choreographed to be accidental. Peter watched the swirling column of leaves rise like a leafy tornado and sighed. "The wind likes to do that," he said, adjusting his grip on the teapot. "It gets very theatrical." I watched, mesmerized, as the leaves drifted back to the grass in slow, drifting arcs. It was honestly beautiful, in an annoying kind of way. Just then, a woman in gardening clothes strode briskly around the side of Monticello. She had the kind of walk that meant business, not angry business, just very purposeful business. She carried 3 gardening tools tucked under one arm and a basket of acorns in the other, which seemed like more acorns than one person ever needed at once. "Oh, good," she said when she spotted us. "You're the one Mr. Jefferson said was helping." Helping, a very generous word for what I was doing. She set the basket down with a thump. "We need the leaves cleared from the tulip beds. They're smothering the bulbs, and the bulbs have been very temperamental this year." I blinked. "The bulbs are temperamental?" "Oh, yes," she said with complete seriousness. "Tulips have strong feelings, always have." Peter nodded as if this were absolute scientific fact. The gardener continued. "Mr. Jefferson imported these tulip varieties himself, said they were the pride of Europe. I suppose in Europe the wind is better behaved." I doubted that. Wind is wind. It has no borders. Before I could respond, she noticed the dog from earlier, the determined one with the stick, dragging its prize back across the lawn. Only now the stick had somehow acquired a ribbon, a long, pale blue ribbon trailing behind it like a festive parade streamer. "That dog again," the gardener muttered. "It took the laundry ribbon off the line this morning." "The ribbon looks nice on the stick," I said. The gardener stared at me like she wasn't sure whether to agree or put me to work immediately. Peter offered her tea from the teapot. "Mr. Jefferson always says gardening requires hydration." She accepted a cup, sipped it thoughtfully, then turned back to me. "Well, if you're going to rake, you may as well rake with purpose. And when the wind misbehaves, which it always does, you rake again and again and again." "Gardening," she said firmly, "is mostly repetition and optimism." "That sounds about right," Peter murmured. The gardener pointed toward a long row of tulip beds along the side of the house. "Start there. Don't let the leaves settle on the soil, and if the wind fights you, tell it you're busy." "Tell the wind," I repeated. "Yes. Assert yourself." I nodded slowly, as if that was something I did every day. The gardener picked up her basket of acorns and strode off, leaving Peter and me in a small cloud of floating leaves. "Well," Peter said, "she's very knowledgeable, and also slightly frightening." A chicken wandered by, looked at me, then at the rake, then clucked as if deeply unimpressed. I moved toward the tulip beds, lifted the rake again, and whoosh! Another wave of leaves rushed in and covered the entire area like a leafy blanket. Peter poured himself another tiny cup of tea. "We'll get the hang of it," he said gently. I wasn't convinced. But the day was young, and the wind was energetic. I lowered the rake again, trying to look confident, even though the wind was eyeing me like a cat sizing up an unpredictable toy. I took a moment to study the tulip beds the gardener had pointed out. They were lined in neat, well-tended rows, or at least they would have been, if not for the absolute monarchy of leaves that had taken over. Every color, from burnt orange to deep gold, blanketed the soil like a leafy quilt. The wind, of course, liked this arrangement very much. You could tell. It whispered in long, sweeping sighs through the trees above us, lifting tiny bits of debris as if showing off what it could do with more effort. I raised the rake again. "I'm not afraid of you," I told the leaves quietly. Peter took a sip of tea and squinted. "Are you speaking to the leaves?" "I'm asserting myself," I said confidently, though confidence was perhaps not the right word. It was more of a sleepy determination with a touch of uncertainty. The gardener said it would help. Peter nodded like this was reasonable, but he kept watching in case something strange happened. I raked a bold, dramatic swath down the length of the tulip bed. A clean line formed, a beautifully clean line, for about 1 second. Then came a breeze the size of a minor weather event. Whoosh. The entire line disappeared under a new cascade of leaves. A few even slapped softly against my cloak, which felt a little personal. Peter sighed sympathetically. "It's like trying to organize Jefferson's shoe collection." "His shoe collection?" "Oh yes," Peter said. "He has dozens. He likes to keep spares for walking, riding, gardening, reading, drafting documents. Each one is for a specific purpose. Very practical, in theory. Quite chaotic in practice. I imagined Jefferson delivering the Declaration of Independence in one pair of shoes, then changing them to revise the punctuation. I wasn't sure if that was historically accurate, but it certainly felt possible. Before I could dwell on it, another staff member approached. This time it was a young girl, maybe 12 or 13, carrying a basket full of walnuts. She was completely unfazed by the swirling chaos of leaves around us. "Mr. Jefferson says not to let the leaves stay too long, or they'll make the ground too moist," she declared in the matter-of-fact way only children and very confident adults can manage. "If the bulbs get soggy, they won't bloom right." "That makes sense," I said. "Also," she added, "the wind is mean today." Peter nodded solemnly. "Quite mean." The girl set her basket on the ground, reached into the bottom, and pulled out a single walnut. She held it up like she was presenting a profound truth. "This walnut," she said, "fell from the tree and hit Mr. Jefferson on the shoulder during lunch. He took it as a personal affront." Peter whispered. "He did. I'm supposed to plant it later," the girl continued, "so the tree will grow and maybe produce politer walnuts." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I said, "That's a noble goal." She nodded, satisfied, then began walking toward the orchard, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like it was meant to intimidate the wind. Peter looked down at his teapot, then back at me. "Well," he said softly, "at least the walnuts are on our side." I took a deep breath and tried something different. Instead of raking outward, I raked inward, pulling the leaves into one spot, then placing my foot gently on the pile, trapping it like a sleepy leaf sandwich. It actually worked. The wind blew around me, confused but still trying. A few leaves scattered, but the main pile stayed put under the firm authority of my boot. Peter gasped. "You've done it." "I think so. You've discovered the anti-wind technique." I lifted the rake like a triumphant warrior, a very tired, very gentle warrior who really wanted a cup of tea, but triumphant nonetheless. Then the wind. Well, the wind decided to respond. It sent one enormous gust, powerful enough to puff my cloak outward and scatter leaves across the entire hillside. Not just the ones I'd trapped. All the leaves, a whole new avalanche, fell from the maple trees overhead, raining down like golden confetti. Peter blinked slowly. "Well," he murmured, "the wind has opinions again." Leaves swirled around my head. Some landed in my hood. One got stuck in Peter's hair. Another landed in his teacup, which he tried politely to ignore. I sighed. "So, we just keep raking?" Peter nodded with great resignation, again, and again, and again, until dinner. Which, honestly, sounded exactly like something that would happen at Monticello. I had just managed to gather a very modest, very delicate pile of leaves, small enough to fit into a generous soup bowl, but still a victory, when I heard footsteps behind us, slow, thoughtful footsteps, the kind of footsteps belonging to someone who has opinions. Peter straightened immediately, adjusting his vest and standing up a little taller. "Oh dear," he murmured. "He's coming." I turned around, and sure enough, a tall man with white hair pulled back into a ribbon was making his way across the lawn. His expression carried that familiar Jefferson look, thoughtful, curious, slightly distracted, as if he were actively solving 5 problems at once and eating lunch in his mind. He paused near us, surveying the scene with great seriousness. "Ah," he said at last, "the eternal struggle of man versus leaf." I wasn't sure how to respond, so I gave a polite half-bow, half-nod. The kind you give when you're greeting someone you've read about in history books but never expected to meet while holding a rake. Jefferson stepped closer, looking down at my tiny, fragile leaf pile. "A beginning," he said warmly. "A modest one, but everything begins modestly. Even democracy." Peter's cheeks flushed with pride, even though he hadn't touched the rake once. Jefferson crouched down, examining one of the leaves like it contained the secrets of the universe. "Maple," he said thoughtfully. "Quite philosophical trees. They drop their leaves early to contemplate winter." I blinked. Peter nodded like this was absolutely true. Jefferson plucked up another leaf. "Oak leaves fall later, more stubbornly. The oak is a steadfast companion. Loyal, durable, slightly obstinate." He paused, then added with a sigh, "Much like myself." A particularly bold gust of wind chose that moment to sweep by, scattering my tiny leaf pile into absolute oblivion. The leaves soared into the air like a flock of autumn birds. One leaf even landed dramatically on Jefferson's shoulder. He didn't flinch. He simply lifted it, considered it, and placed it gently in Peter's teacup, which confused everyone, including the tea. "The wind," Jefferson continued calmly, "is a negotiator, persistent, unruly, but not unreasonable. You must work with it, not against it." I nodded slowly. Peter whispered, "We've been working against it." Jefferson smiled kindly. "Yes, I gathered that. It has been undoing your progress with great enthusiasm." Just then, the determined little dog from earlier reappeared, still dragging the giant stick. Only now it had acquired another ribbon. A red one. It trotted proudly across the lawn, looking very pleased with itself. Jefferson sighed with the weariness of a man who has lost many household items to that dog. "That creature," he said, "has stolen 3 socks, a glove, and an entire quill since Tuesday." Peter whispered, "And a hammer." Jefferson nodded gravely. "Yes, tragic." He turned back to me, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you enjoy raking, Mr. Clyde?" "I'm giving it my best," I said honestly. "Good," Jefferson replied with the polite endurance of a man who's heard that before. "Raking is a philosophical endeavor. Leaves remind us of the passage of time, of cycles, of the importance of humility. And," he added, lowering his voice, "they frustrate the wind, which is always satisfying." The wind puffed again, disagreeing loudly. Jefferson straightened his coat and cleared his throat. "Well, I shall leave you to it. I'm off to the library to solve a problem regarding the height of a bookcase and the length of a ladder." Peter nodded knowingly. "A persistent issue?" "Indeed." Jefferson gave me an encouraging smile. carry on. The tulips will thank you in the spring." And with that, he strolled back toward the house, humming a tune that sounded suspiciously like a string quartet trying to remember its own melody. Peter watched him go. "He seemed impressed," he said hopefully. I wasn't sure that was true, but I did feel a little more determined, even if the wind was still plotting. Jefferson had barely disappeared around the corner of the house when the wind made a triumphant return, sweeping across the lawn like it had been waiting for him to leave. It tossed a scattering of leaves straight into the air, swirling them in a spirited dance that felt just a little bit smug. I lifted the rake as if preparing for battle. Peter lifted his teapot as if preparing for emotional support, mostly. The little dog with the ribbon-covered stick barreled by us again, this time dragging the stick in a wide, heroic arc that sent leaves flying like startled birds. It looked incredibly proud of itself, tail wagging with the force of a small windmill. "That dog," Peter said with weary admiration, "has more confidence than every statesman in Congress." I watched as the dog paused near a large oak tree, sniffed something decisive, then began digging with the determination of an archaeologist looking for ancient treasure. Leaves flew everywhere. Dirt kicked up in little sprays. The stick bounced on the ground like it too, had things to accomplish today. But before I could comment on this new development, a voice called out from the far side of the lawn. "Clyde! Mr. Clyde!" The middle-aged man in a tan waistcoat hurried toward us, wiping his hands on a cloth and breathing a little harder than someone who claimed to walk the grounds several times daily. He looked like the kind of man who had a dozen responsibilities and was very aware of all of them. "I hear you're helping us with the raking," he said as soon as he reached us, offering a somewhat relieved smile. "Thank heavens. We're short-handed today. Half the staff is in the smokehouse preparing hams for curing." Peter leaned toward me. "The hams are excellent," he whispered. "Life-changing even." The man continued, gesturing around us with a sweeping, slightly dramatic motion. "We need the pathways cleared, the garden beds uncovered, the orchard walkway tidied, and if possible, the western slope neatened before sundown." I blinked. That was a lot. He studied me more closely. "Have you raked before?" Peter answered for me. "He's extremely dedicated." Which was true, in the sense that I was dedicated to trying. The man gave an approving nod. "Excellent. Mr. Jefferson always says good spirits matter more than skill." He paused, reconsidering, although skill does help. A gust of wind promptly lifted a whole sheet of leaves off the ground and threw them into the air like confetti at a very chaotic parade. Some of them drifted onto the man's shoulders and hat. He sighed loudly, then brushed them off with the resignation of a man who has fought the same battle every day for years. At that exact moment, the little dog returned, Herb, triumphant, now dragging the stick and the blue ribbon and the red ribbons and a stray sock that had absolutely not been there earlier. The man froze. "Is that my sock?" Peter nodded politely. "Yes." The man sighed again, deeper this time. "I suppose I'll retrieve it later." The dog, delighted with itself, pranced off toward the orchard again, ribbons fluttering wildly. Peter poured the man a cup of tea from his ever-present teapot, holding it out like a peace offering. "Apple, Herb?" The man accepted it gratefully. "Bless you." He took a sip, then looked at the leaves, then at the wind, then at me. "Well," he said, "good luck." He walked away with the slow, trudging steps of someone mentally preparing himself to chase a dog through an orchard for a sock. Peter and I stood there in silence as another swirl of leaves gathered at my feet. "Mr. Clyde," Peter said gently, "the wind is giving us an opening." It wasn't. It was gathering strength. But I nodded anyway, because sometimes optimism is its own tool, and lifted the rake again. By this point, the lawn looked less like a tidy estate and more like the aftermath of a very enthusiastic, leaf-inspired festival. Leaves everywhere, leaves on the walkways, leaves in the tulip beds, leaves gathering boldly on the steps of Monticello like they were preparing for a political meeting of their own. Peter exhaled slowly. "We need a plan," he said, clutching the teapot as if it offered emotional stability. I nodded. A plan. Behind us, the determined dog trotted by again, still dragging that enormous stick covered in ribbons and the lone tragic sock. It looked more confident than any of us. Peter lowered his voice. "You've done well, Mr. Clyde. But the wind has outmaneuvered us at every turn." That was true. The wind had better reflexes, more experience, and possibly a personal vendetta against tidiness. Just then, a new group approached, 3 staff members from the nearby workshops. One held a broom, one carried a shovel, the third carried a single onion for reasons I was afraid to ask. "We heard there's trouble," the broom holder said, nodding gravely. "With the leaves?" added the shovel holder. The onion holder simply lifted the onion and looked determined. Peter straightened. "Gentlemen, and onion, thank you for coming." The broom holder leaned against his broom. "It's the wind, isn't it? Always the wind." The shovel holder spit into the grass like an experienced rancher dealing with a familiar foe. "Wind never cooperates, doesn't respect schedules." Peter nodded. "True." The onion holder still said nothing but held up the onion again like it was a badge of office. I cleared my throat. "Well, maybe we can work together. If we gather the leaves all at once, maybe the wind won't—" A sudden burst of wind ripped through the orchard path behind us, swirling leaves into a moving spiral that looked like a miniature cyclone heading directly toward us. Peter took a step back. The dog balked at it happily, entirely misunderstanding the situation. The onion holder clutched his onion protectively. The leaf cyclone slowed right as it reached us, then gently deposited a fresh pile at my feet, like an offering or an insult. It was hard to tell with leaves. The group stared at it in silence. "Well," the broom holder said, "that was rude." Peter nodded. "Very rude." The shovel holder muttered, "Wind's got attitude today." The onion holder just shook his head grimly. Another gust blew through. Not quite as strong, but strong enough to send Peter's hat tumbling across the lawn. He gasped and chased after it with the teapot still in hand, clearly torn between saving the hat or the tea. He saved the tea. The hat rolled away like a wheel of runaway cheese. I lifted the rake again, staring at the new pile of leaves. "All right," I said softly. "We can do this." The broom holder tightened his grip. The shovel holder dug his heel into the soil. The onion holder cradled his onion like a tiny comrade in arms. Peter returned, breathing heavily, holding the teapot and absolutely no hat. "The wind," he said between breaths, "won." Everyone nodded. That sounded right. The gardener from earlier marched past us, carrying a basket full of acorns again. She paused long enough to look at the scattered leaves, the dog, the ribbons, the swirling wind, the men with tools, and the onion holder. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Good luck to all of you." Then she continued on. I took a deep breath, lifted my rake, and prepared for the next move in the slow, sleepy battle between Clyde and an unusually opinionated breeze. Our newly formed Leaf Strategy Council, broom holder, shovel holder, onion holder, Peter with the teapot, and myself, stood in a solemn semicircle around the latest pile of leaves. It wasn't a very big pile, but it was the idea of the pile that mattered. Peter held the teapot like it was a ceremonial object of great significance. The broom holder leaned forward, studying the leaves as if waiting for them to confess something. The shovel holder stood tall with an expression of gritty determination. The onion holder clutched his onion with the intensity of someone guarding crown jewels. "All right," Peter said, clearing his throat. "We rake together, all at once. The wind can't scatter all of it." "It can try," the broom holder muttered darkly. "It will try," the shovel holder added. The onion holder simply nodded, solemn and silent, and deeply committed to the onion lifestyle. I took my position at the front of the formation, rake ready. Peter raised his teapot like a general raising a flag. "On my count," he said. 1. We lowered our tools. 2. The wind rustled the leaves as if warming up. 3. We raked. Oh, we raked beautifully. 5 tools moving in perfect harmony. Broom sweeping, rake gathering, shovel scooping, onion holder. Well, mainly supervising, but still very valiantly. Leaves gathered into a triumphant pile. A large pile. The biggest of the day. Peter gasped in delight. "We've done it! We've..." Whoosh! A monstrous gust of wind barreled down the hill like it had been waiting for this exact dramatic moment. It hit the pile with all the subtlety of a marching band. Leaves erupted skyward in a glorious fountain of chaos, swirling above us in spirals and loops, raining back down like golden confetti. The entire pile was gone in 3 seconds. Peter froze. The broom holder stared in disbelief. The shovel holder swore softly under his breath. The onion holder looked down at his onion like it had personally betrayed him. Peter said faintly, was not expecting that." The wind blew again, but more gently this time. A smug little puff, like it was laughing at us. At that moment, Thomas Jefferson's voice echoed from the portico. "Excellent! The air is invigorated today." He had no idea what had just happened. Peter watched him disappear back inside, then turned to me with a look of exhausted bewilderment. "Mr. Clyde," he said, "I think the wind may actually be winning." The dog with a ribbon-covered stick burst through the scene again, scattering even more leaves in wide, joyful arcs. This time it had somehow acquired a quill in addition to the sock and ribbons. Peter whispered, horrified, "He got the quill." "That's not ideal," the broom holder said. "Jefferson loves those quills," the shovel holder added. The onion holder raised his onion in a dramatic gesture of warning, as if predicting doom. We all stared at the dog as it bounded away, trailing the quill like a feathered banner of impending consequences. Peter let out a long, defeated sigh. "We're going to have to return that before Mr. Jefferson notices." "Will the dog let you take it?" I asked. "No," Peter said miserably. "He never does." The wind blew another smug little swirl of leaves at our feet, as if asking whether we wanted to try again. I looked at Peter. Peter looked at me. The onion holder looked at his onion. We all felt the same thing. This was far from over. After the great leaf explosion, as I was starting to think of it, the council needed a moment to recover. We all stood there, staring at the sky as though hoping the leaves would return out of guilt. The wind, however, had absolutely no intention of apologizing. Peter was the first to speak. "I think," he said slowly, "we need a different tactic." The shovel holder nodded. "Something bold." The broom holder added, "Something clever." The onion holder raised his onion because at this point, that seemed to be his primary method of communication. I looked around the grounds, leaves everywhere. It felt like staring at a puzzle with too many pieces and a mischievous designer. Then I noticed something. The orchard trees weren't shedding as many leaves in this particular moment. The wind had shifted slightly, blowing away from the orchard instead of toward it. "Maybe we rake where the wind isn't blowing," I suggested. The group stared at me. Peter blinked. The broom holder looked impressed. The onion holder whispered to his onion, clearly moved. That, Peter said, almost stunned, might actually work. So we marched, a dramatic single-file line of men with tools and one with produce, down toward the orchard. When we reached the slightly sheltered path under the apple trees, everything felt calmer. The air was gentler here, quieter. Leaves still drifted, but they settled rather than launched themselves skyward like tiny acrobats. The shovel holder tested the air with a slow wave of his hand. Yes, yes, very mild here. The broom holder pushed a leaf. It barely moved. Oh, this is extraordinary. Peter actually smiled with real hope. The wind can't get us here. The onion holder nodded with deep satisfaction. We began raking, and this time, the leaves stayed put. A glorious, orderly pile began forming, large, rounded, sturdy, the kind of leaf pile that would make children want to jump into it and adults want to admire it respectfully. Even the dog passed by without chaos, still dragging the stick, but in a peaceful, trotting manner. The ribbons fluttered gently, the stolen sock hanging like a tiny flag of victory. The quill was still there too, though I tried not to think too hard about it. We raked and raked, the orchard filling with rhythmic scraping sounds. There was no wind challenge, no sudden leaf rebellion, just steady progress, the kind of work that felt almost meditative. After a while, Peter exhaled a long, relieved breath. Mr. Clyde, we're actually doing it. The broom holder wiped his forehead. Feels good. The shovel holder nodded. Feels right. The onion holder raised his onion toward the heavens in a small, silent celebration. We took a step back and admired the enormous pile. It was the most beautiful thing I'd seen all day. Crisp, organized, stable, a monument to cooperation and stubbornness. Peter sniffed the air dramatically, as if tasting victory. You know, he said dreamily, if we keep this up, we could clear the entire orchard path before supper. That was when, on cue, dash, dash, dash. The wind changed direction. A single gust slipped into the orchard like a mischievous intruder. Not strong, not violent, just curious. It nudged the pile. The pile trembled. Peter's eyes widened in horror. No, the broom holder whispered, hold steady. The shovel holder braced. The onion holder hugged his onion protectively. The pile swayed, tilted, and dashed. Woof! The dog burst through it at full speed, trailing ribbons, the sock, the quill, and a renewed sense of purpose. The entire pile exploded like a leafy volcano. Leaves everywhere. Leaves raining down, leaves sticking to cloaks, hats, hair, teapots. The orchard looked like a snow globe someone had shaken vigorously. Peter stared at the chaos, then closed his eyes and whispered, I don't think this is what Mr. Jefferson meant by humility. I patted his shoulder. It's fine. We'll try again. He nodded, defeated but determined, and refilled his teacup from the endlessly loyal teapot. The dog trotted away again, with a very elegant apple stuck to the ribbon this time because of course it did. Peter sighed. Well, he murmured, at least the wind seems entertained. The sun dipped lower across the Virginia hills, turning the sky a warm, peachy gold, the kind that makes the entire world look like it's softening at the edges. The long shadows from the orchard trees stretched across the lawn in gentle lines, and the air grew cooler, the kind of cool that hints at supper being not too far away. Peter tilted his head, listening. There it is, he whispered. At first I didn't hear anything, just the faint rustle of leaves and the distant clucking of the chickens having a small disagreement near the vegetable patch. Then, softly, like someone tapping a spoon on the rim of a teacup, the sound of the supper bell carried across the grounds. Peter exhaled. Bless the kitchen. The broom holder lowered his broom with the reverence of someone laying down arms after a long campaign. The shovel holder wiped his hands on his vest. The onion holder gently placed his onion into his pocket as though tucking in a beloved child. The determined dog, hearing the bell, perked up instantly and began galloping toward the main house, stick bouncing, ribbons waving, quill bobbing dangerously, sock flapping like a flag of triumph. I shook my head. Does he always get this excited for supper? Peter nodded heavily. Oh yes, he once stole an entire biscuit tin. He ate the biscuits? No, Peter said. He hid them for later. We never found them. The supper bell chimed again, this time a little louder, drifting across the orchard in a warm way that made my stomach remember that meals exist. But before we could leave, the wind brushed against us once more. Soft, cool, almost gentle. Not the chaotic wind from earlier. This one felt more like a sigh. A few leaves fluttered down from the highest branches of the orchard trees and settled at our feet. Not in a mocking way, not in a rebellious swirl, just a soft landing, like an apology. Or maybe a truce. Peter stared at them. Do you think the wind is done? The broom holder squinted. Could be. The shovel holder listened to the rustle in the branches. Feels calmer. The onion holder nodded sagely. And I bent down with the rake and pulled the scattered leaves into a small, neat pile. This time, nothing stirred. No gust, no swirl, no dramatic leaf tornado. They simply stayed where they were. Peter gasped. Mr. Clyde, look, you've won. I didn't know if it really counted as winning, but it felt like something. A small victory, or a polite concession from the wind. Peter straightened his vest. We must go before the stew gets cold. The kitchen ladies get cross if you're late, and Mr. Jefferson gets philosophical about punctuality. The broom holder sighed. Oh no, not the punctuality lecture. The shovel holder shivered. Last time he compared lateness to the fall of Carthage. The onion holder covered his onion as if shielding it from such ideas. Peter leaned closer to me and whispered, just not a lot. He likes that. We began heading toward the house, tools over shoulders, boots crunching gently through the remaining leaves. As we reached the edge of the orchard, Peter paused and turned back, looking at the small, tidy pile beneath the apple branches. It really is quite nice, he said warmly. I nodded. We did our best. And that, Peter said proudly, is all Monticello ever asks. The wind brushed by one more time, a final, soft sigh, but it didn't scatter anything. If anything, it nudged a stray leaf closer to the pile as though making amends. We continued walking toward the warm glow spilling from the kitchen windows, the distant sound of voices and clattering pots floating through the air. Behind us, the leaves settled into the quiet of early evening. The warm glow spilling from the kitchen windows felt like a soft invitation as we approached the house. The closer we got, the more the scents of supper drifted through the air. Roasted chicken, biscuits, something with cinnamon, and a stew so hearty it practically introduced itself. Peter breathed in deeply. That, he said reverently, is the smell of survival. Inside, the kitchen was a swirl of activity. Clattering pans, laughing voices, someone arguing fiercely about the correct amount of nutmeg for a pie. The moment we stepped inside, a woman at the stove spun around, brandishing a wooden spoon. You're late, she scolded, pointing at Peter. Again. Peter lowered his head. The wind was dramatic today. She narrowed her eyes. Is this about the leaves again? Peter nodded. She sighed. Of course it is. Sit down. We did. And let me tell you, the food was spectacular. Warm, comforting, cooked with the kind of skill only a kitchen that feeds Thomas Jefferson regularly would possess. Even the biscuits looked proud of themselves. At some point during the meal, Jefferson entered with a book under his arm, hair slightly wind-tousled as though the breeze had also tried to negotiate with him. He greeted everyone cheerfully, took a seat, and immediately launched into a story about comparing garden layouts across European estates. Everyone nodded like this was completely normal dinner conversation. Peter leaned over to whisper, "This is nothing. Last week he explained the philosophy of gravy." I nodded politely, unsure how to respond to gravy philosophy. After supper, as lamps were being lit and the kitchen began slowing into its evening rhythm, I slipped back outside for a bit of fresh air. The sky had deepened into a soft indigo, with the last traces of peach fading along the horizon. The grounds were quiet now, the wind calmer, as if it had finally used up all its opinions for the day. Leaves crunched softly under my boots as I walked across the yard. A few drifted lazily from the trees, settling on the ground like tired dancers after a long performance. Somewhere in the distance, the dog barked, a single, triumphant bark, then trotted by carrying the same stick. Only now it had a tiny dinner roll wedged onto the end of it. "I don't even want to know," I murmured. The dog wagged its tail, proud, and vanished behind a shed. I wandered toward the orchard again, where the small, tidy pile of leaves we had left earlier still sat untouched beneath the apple tree. It looked peaceful there, almost intentional, like a little monument to an afternoon well spent. A light breeze passed through the branches, gentle this time, brushing my hair and cloak. A single apple dropped to the grass with a soft thump, rolling a few inches before coming to rest at my boot. I bent down, picked it up, and took a slow breath. The air smelled of earth and leaves, supper lingering on the wind, and the faint sweetness of the apple in my hand. It was quiet, calm, unhurried, the kind of moment where the world feels like it's settling in for sleep. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I began to feel the familiar warmth, the soft humming reminder that my journey would soon continue elsewhere. But not yet. Not quite. I took one more slow stroll through the quiet orchard, savoring the peacefulness of Monticello at twilight. I took a slow bite of the apple as I wandered further along the quiet path behind Monticello. It was crisp and sweet, with a little tartness at the end. The kind of flavor that tastes exactly like early evening in autumn feels soft, cool, a little nostalgic. The orchard stretched behind me in a long slope of shadowed trees. The last ribbon of sunset lingered on the horizon, turning the tops of the branches a deep bronze. For the first time all day, not a single leaf moved, not even one. It felt like the whole estate was finally exhaling. As I reached a small bench tucked under an old oak tree, I sat down and let the calm settle around me. The breeze brushed past gently, not in the dramatic, mischievous way it had earlier, but in the soft, drifting way that comes after the world has grown a little sleepy. Somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint clink of dishes being washed, muffled conversation drifting from the open kitchen windows, and the dog barking triumphantly, which probably meant it had stolen something again. Hopefully, not the gravy ladle. I rested my elbows on my knees and looked out at the dusky hills. Fireflies were starting to blink to life in the tall grass. One floated close to me, glowing faintly before drifting off again. Peaceful, warm, familiar. That was when I felt it. Very faint at first, like the softest vibration against my leg. The stone, the smooth, rounded travel stone tucked safely in the inside pocket of my coat. Not humming yet, not glowing, just shifting its weight a little, the way a sleepy cat stretches before awakening. A soft reminder, a gentle nudge. I closed my hands around it through the fabric of my cloak, feeling the warmth start to build. Slow, patient, no rush. "I know," I whispered. "It's almost time." I took another look around the quiet grounds. The lanterns glowed warmly along the walkway. A lone chicken wandered past, looking fully satisfied with its day. Peter stepped out onto the porch with a small cup of tea, sipping it thoughtfully as he watched the trees. He didn't see me, but I watched him, calm, content, as though finally forgiving the wind for the afternoon's chaos. This place, with all its swirling leaves, opinionated breezes, runaway dogs, philosophical gardeners, kitchen lectures, and Jefferson's extremely animated shoe stories. It had a kind of charm that made the world feel slower, softer, sleepier. The stone pulsed again, a little brighter now, warming the fabric of my coat. I stood slowly, brushed a leaf from my boot, and took one more long look at Monticello settled in the rising moonlight. The wind drifted past, cool and gentle, brushing the grass like a quiet good night. "Thank you," I whispered to no one in particular, or maybe to the day itself. The stone glowed softly in response, a warm golden light growing stronger in my pocket, wrapping itself around me like a quiet invitation. I took a step forward, and the world began to fade into a soft, shimmering blur. Not abruptly, not dramatically, just the way twilight dissolves into night. Slowly, sleepily, like drifting into a dream. Monticello faded into warm light. The orchard dimmed into shadows. The wind sighed one last time. And then everything fell into a gentle, glowing stillness.